Okay, we are recording now. Can everybody hear me?
You're not on the camera.
I'm not on the camera?
No.
I'm going to move behind.
Yeah, move behind him, Frank.
Sorry.
Yes.
You don't need to look at me. Is it still on now?
No.
No?
Yes.
It is? Is it on?
No.
How about now?
A little better.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Just a few comments first on the film before we move to our Little Jerusalem panel. So for those of you who have not seen the copper ark that is from our old synagogue building, we moved it 2 years ago. It is in the small chapel. Please go take a look at it. The ark was actually designed by Reverend William Flax, who's one of the cantors in our old Ohavi Zedek synagogue. The wooden model for the actual copper ark that was then made by Morris Wool is actually in the chapel also. It's to the left of the ark on the wall. The maps that are in the film, that are colored maps with the yellow businesses and pink synagogues, those are actually maps that Jeff and I created. Some of them are in the lounge. More importantly now, those maps were based upon city directories, which allowed us to trace, which you also saw in the film, that allowed us to trace the growth of the Jewish community. The Lost Mural Project has now embarked upon a process to digitize the entire Jewish community's growth from 1860 through 1950 using the 10-year federal decennials. We're in the middle of a 2-year contract now with a digital graphic artist to do that. It's a pretty neat process. You're going to see the entire community. You're going to be able to click on an address and see the businesses or the people's pictures that lived at that address. And then we're going to be overlaying it with other immigrant groups that are in the Old North End. The plaque, the Hebrew Free School plaque that was made by Levin is actually in the synagogue hallways. And the pushka, the charitable box that is also shown, that was also done by Morris Wool. That's actually in the OC Archives cabinet. And that's all I wanted to say in terms of the film itself. So, welcome to the Little Jerusalem panel. I'm going to quickly ask the people to introduce themselves and tell us where they first lived in the Old North End. And Frank, let's start with you on your side.
Well, Frank Donuth, and I can't compare to these old-timers here. They were born here, and we are newcomers. So we came here in 1958, so we're only able to tell a story as to the shock of coming here as to what the town was like when we came.
Art?
My name's Art Greenblatt, and I came here in 1939, and I lived in the Old North End for many years on Archibald Street.
Please use the mics.
Louder. Louder.
My name is Sam Bloomberg. I lived on North Street in Burlington, and I was born there. I'm pictured in that and talked about on the Bloomberg Street Store, where all of us in the family were during the time we were growing up.
Merrill Epstein. I think I'm the kid on the block here. And was born here and originally lived on Innabelle Avenue.
Hi, I'm David Hirschberg. I was born in 1932. I lived in the Old North End near H.O. Wheeler School, where all the immigrant kids went to school. I was there just in kindergarten. My father must have gotten hot in a poker game because he built a big house 2 doors down. So in 1938, we left Little Jerusalem, and I went to school at Pomeroy School on Booth Street, and they were open for 1.5 years of my life, and then they built Taft School, and that was my school until Burlington High School.
I'm Mike Goldstein. I was born in 1940. We lived at 445 North Winooski Avenue. And then my father became a little more affluent, and they moved to Shelburne Road.
I'm Stan Rosenthal, born in 1937. Looking around here, I thank you all because I feel much younger. We had, my grandfather started the business, which was Empire Laundry in Old Jerusalem, right on across the street from the Talmud Torah, where I'd gone to Hebrew school. And then my family, there were 8 children from my grandfather. They all left except my mother, and we all grew up in the laundry business. And I've stayed here all my life.
If you can't hear me, I have sinus, and my voice is very heavy. Can you hear?
Yes.
I'll try and shout. I came along with Frank in 1958. Before we came up, and I heard that we were going to be moving to Vermont, I thought I'd have like a farm, and I'd be able to have a horse, have all those wonderful things that I used to have to go and pay for.
I don't think your microphone is.
You have to bring it close to it.
No, but
Ducky, can you hold your mic right up to your mouth, please?
Closer. Okay. We came and we found our home
Closer.
in the new North End. And it was pretty new at the time. Our street was new. No one had lived in the house before. Things were so different. We bought this house. The furniture came, but we hadn't signed yet at the bank. And the builder let us move into the house even before we had a lease or before we had any financial business with the bank. And we moved in, and when we first moved in, he added different new things that we didn't have. He gave us special heating ducts and everything, and it was just so different, and they just trusted you. You came and you had, you were the owner of the house. And we paid $16,800 for our house. $16,800. And it was the first house we had ever owned, because beforehand, Frank was in service, and I followed him around. So we never had our own home or apartment. And we came up here, and it was country. It was really country. I grew up in South Orange, New Jersey. And from the time we moved up, I loved it. I loved everything about Burlington. The people were lovely. They were very welcoming. And we had one child who was 5 years old, and he hooked up with Jeff Potash. That was the first mistake he made.
Wow, I thought that was my line. So, Dusty, I'm going to pass to Michael. I'm wondering if any of you have any stories you can tell us a day in your Hebrew school career. Could you tell us what you studied, what the hours were, and how old were you? Was it before or after your bar mitzvah? Does anybody have any stories about Hebrew school that they can tell us? Frank? Michael? Can you pass the mic back, please? Pull it up.
Yeah, I remember at the old Talmud Torah, Rabbi Wall had just recently come to Burlington. Harry Kahn was our Hebrew school teacher, And I can remember on recess, we'd go out back and play punch ball. It was kind of fun. But I also can remember Harry Kahn getting a little mad at our class, and he'd throw the erasers and throw the chalk at the students. And we had one guy in our class, Robert Agel, he'd catch the chalk and throw it back.
Anyone else have any memories of Hebrew school? David? What did you study and what hours did you go?
Forget about studying. We went there. We went there after being in school all day long.
So
And
what
we
were your
had
hours?
Hebrew school from 4 to 6, and no one wanted to be there. And we were there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We had to go to shul on Saturday, and we had services on Sunday. And when Joe Dalton in the Little Jerusalem was talking about jumping out the window, he wasn't the only one that jumped out the window. And it was very physical because they weren't afraid to use the rulers, and they hit you plenty of times if you were talking, and no one, I don't think anyone wanted to be there, especially me.
Sam, did you have a comment? Hey, take the mic, hold it way up, please.
Yes, I was one of the people who jumped out. And we had a variety of teachers. Many of them had come from Europe.
Lift your mic up.
Some of them could hardly speak English. And it was a difficult situation. For one thing, we went every day after school and on Sundays, and nobody wanted to do that. And I remember they were also rather vicious with their discipline. They would use the rule, and one day I came home with fingerprints all over my face. My mother was so disturbed that she called there. But that was a situation, and it was difficult to like. How could you like something like that? But we went through it. Yeah.
Where did the teachers come from?
Jail.
I can verify everything they're saying. You had, I don't know if you heard it, but there were 2 windows, not just one. One in the back and one in the front. And I used the one in the back because our class was in the front. So when I asked to go to the bathroom, I skipped the bathroom and went out the window. The downside was that many times when I got home, my parents brought me back. That's when shit hit the fan.
Merrill?
Yeah. My Hebrew school was here at the Ohavi Zedek building because I was a little younger than these guys. And we went 6 hours a week. And then we always went to junior congregation every Saturday morning. We certainly learned Hebrew, we learned prayers, we learned history, we learned all of that. And however, the best memory I had was in this room, because this used to be a basketball court after somebody put up baskets. And we spent all our recesses here and spent other times of the week playing, and I miss that to this day. I also remember there was a little kid that used to run around. He was younger than I was, but I always remembered him running around in trouble. Oh, Mark Leopold.
Guilty as charged.
Anyway.
Does anybody have any memories of special holiday celebrations? And I'm particularly interested in if
I
anybody...
have a memory of something that was the breakout of World War II, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. We were at Hebrew school, and the kids, as naive as they were, marched around like soldiers through the backyard. And that was a memory I have of the start of World War II.
Do people remember the custom of bidding on honors? Did anybody see that? Or
Growing
hear
up
about
in
that?
Burlington, going to school here, I was the only Jewish boy in my class. We had about 220 kids in the class. There were 4 Jewish girls in the class. Most of my friends were all old. The ones that I only hung out with the good people that were Jewish. As a result of this, we were a very close-knit group. Unfortunately, none of them are around anymore. And so it was, I always felt a little guilty in my class, you know, going to school, being the only Jewish boy in my class. And so when we got into a group, we all stayed together. And all the guys I grew up with, again, they were, David's brother was one of them. They were all a year, 2, 3 years older than myself. And so unfortunately, they've all passed away. A couple of the girls are still around, but I'm glad that I grew up here in Burlington.
Michael, can you speak to the custom of bidding on holidays, holiday honors, or Shabbat honors?
Sure. They used to have what they called a stock meeting, and that's where they would auction off the honors for the high holidays.
Ein Tola and Maftir, that's what they would kind of shout out. It was, I think.
So how did it work? Was there an auctioneer?
It was a mass confusion. But people would bid, and I can remember my father bidding, and
it was during the service?
No,
it was a special night.
Oh, okay.
It was a meeting. They called it a stuck meeting.
So before the holidays?
Yeah, before the holidays, and they bid whatever, and the highest bidder would win.
And what were the average bids? How much would people bid?
$1, $2, $3.
Yeah, they weren't much.
Were there any arguments about who would win the bid?
Well, there was, over the Maftir, there usually was an argument.
What were they bidding for?
They were bidding for the holiday honors, like the Aliyahs, or closing the Torah,
The honors
in the Ark.
Calling you up to the Torah.
Hagba?
Ducky, you had a quick story?
I just want to check the veracity of some of the stories that I have heard about the young boys walking to Hebrew school in the old North End when they all lived here, and on holiday time they would get beaten up by the kids that lived in the neighborhood. Is that true?
David, why don't you start the answer to that response?
I was kind of the...
Use the mic. Pass the mic back to David, please.
I was a pretty good scrapper in those days, and because I fought so hard, they kind of left me alone. And so the mothers would call my mother and say, Bessie, they're leaving David alone. Will he walk with Richard and Stephen and this one and that one? Because I was kind of the protector. And yes, they were there. They were there every day when we went to Hebrew school, and when we came home, they wanted to beat us up.
So this is the 30s, right? During the 30s.
30s and 40s. But I didn't always win, but I fought so hard that they finally just left us alone.
Did anyone else on the panel experience that? Art, use your mic, please.
Yeah, I wasn't as big as David. So I
Hold your mic up, please.
remember his mother calling my mother saying, does Art need any help? And I would say, yes, I do. And David's older brother, actually, too. And they'd walk us, there were 2 or 3 kids about my size on the street, and David and his brother would always walk us, not every night, but would walk us down to our homes, yeah.
Wow.
Scary situation.
Wow.
Did any of you have family businesses that you worked in, and did you experience anti-Semitism? Did you or your family members experience anti-Semitism in the business?
Well, I can address that. We had a family business, and it was in the building business as such. We sold floor covering, paint, wallpaper, finished goods. And the good thing about, we experience anti-Semitism, but not in a way that you hear about. It was the type of thing that you'll learn from your parents many times, and you don't even know you're saying it. And I'd have customers come in, and they talk to me, and they were actually like friends. We'd sometimes socialize with them, and they'd say to me, hey, come on, don't Jew me down, this type of thing. And it happened all the time. And yet, that night or that weekend, we'd be with them and having a good time. So you have to be careful how you look at the situation, too, because anti-Semitism can be bad, and on the other side of the fence, it's still anti-Semitism, but it's an unknown to many people.
Sam, did you have a comment on family business and anti-Semitism?
Well, I've had 3 fights in my life, and each one was because I was called a dirty Jew. A couple of them, I was probably elementary school or junior high school, and one actually I was in high school on a junior varsity basketball team. But basically, we do not face it very frequently. And I think although a lot of people might have been anti-Semitic, they guardedly conducted their lives, and it wasn't very apparent. Overall, I can't say that I suffered very much from anti-Semitism. Burlington was a good place. And I think what was remarkable that Rabbi Wall and Bishop Joyce became friendly and did so much ecumenically that they improved relations between the Jews and non-Jews, and Burlington got even better in that respect.
Well, we had, my dad was when he came from Lithuania, had a horse and wagon, and he peddled. And he wanted to marry my mother, and my mother said, I'm not marrying a peddler. So it kind of gave him the incentive to sell his horse and buy a truck. But we ended up being the largest food service provider in Vermont, and we never had any problem with anti-Semitism in business. They were very, very kind to us and very good to us, and we always felt they were more friends than they were customers. So that was never an issue for us.
Do any of you remember, Tucker, you have a comment on?
Yeah, I have a comment. Well, I heard stories, and I imagine Frank has too, of the anti-Semitism, and it must have been something governmental too here in the Burlington city, because there were several areas in the town that were forbidden to sell to Jews.
Right across the street, Colonial Square.
Right, right.
A lot of places.
And these, wait, you got me off track. Some of the waterfront property in the area where we are, the Apple Tree Point, you couldn't sell a Jew to Apple Tree Point, and there were no Jewish people. I think Sam Fishman was the only member of the big men's club.
Ethan Allen.
Ethan Allen Club.
Yeah.
Khalifa Club.
Michael or Merrill, do you have?
I was
Sam, you have comments on that?
reluctant to join the Ethan Allen Club because there are so few Jewish people there. But a lawyer in Burlington, how are you going to break down prejudices if you don't become part of the group? And also, the Basin Harbor Club in near Virginia did not permit Jews. It was restricted, as were a few other places around the state.
Yeah, the country club was not open to Jews. The swim club, in the very beginning when we came up here, there were no Jews. And then I think what happened is they weren't getting enough members. So they started taking Jews as members. But there were a lot of different smaller entities that were forbidden to
Merrill?
Jews.
Merrill or Michael, would you have a comment on that?
Well, yeah. What these people did before me was apparently paved the way so things were better. Because when I went to school, I was actually looking at a picture from second grade, the end of the year, and I counted up there were 32 students, 8 of us were Jewish. So it wasn't exactly a minority, at least at our school, but this was Taft School, which is in the Hill District. You know, it wasn't the same as the old North End. And never really encountered anti-Semitism. I spoke with 2 classmates, Jay Pascal, Arnold Cohen, just recently, and they also said they had not seen anything either that resembled that. We may have been aware that the Burlington Country Club, for instance, was not a place for Jews, but I mean, for me, that didn't have any meaning, because I wasn't interested, my family wasn't interested. And my father's business was in Winooski, of all places, which was largely French-Canadian, and I don't ever recall him mentioning any problems there either. And I never really experienced it when I worked there or went there. So again, our experience was different.
Michael, do you have a comment?
Can I just?
Yeah. As far as in business, we owned a couple of restaurants in downtown Burlington, and we experienced no anti-Semitism whatsoever. We did, once in a while, have a problem with a supplier, but I don't know if it was anti-Semitism or just poor proprietorship.
Art?
I think you also have to understand that when anti-Semitism was rampant, Jews hung around together. Jews did everything together. Jews didn't do anything with anybody else. And that made a big difference too. It made you stand out. And I think anybody that did it that way would stand out also. It's not just a matter of being Jewish. But we were a group of people that hung around, and God forbid you when a Jewish guy would go out with a Catholic girl. You'd be dragged down the street, for God's sake, by the Jews, not by anybody else. And all of a sudden, I think the Jewish community got a little sharper, a little smarter. And they actually were growing not in numbers so much, but growing in mentality. And what would happen is that, we went out into the workforce instead of working for each other. And we spread the word. And I think people started liking us. And then all of a sudden, things opened up. Slowly, but they opened up. Where for 100 years, they didn't open up. It was the way it was in Europe or Russia or whatever. So I think you have to look at the whole picture rather than just why that happened.
People remember East European Jewish foods that your grandparents made that are not made now and that you really liked? And are there particular customs that your grandparents observed that you remember that are not done now? Anybody have any stories or narratives on that topic?
I had an interesting situation where I had two Hebrew names. The reason being, my father's name was Lev, and so they assumed I was a Levi. And so every time there would be an aliyah given, I'd be given second aliyah. Several years later, when I went to get married, Rabbi went back into the archives. He found out I was a Israel. I wasn't a Levi. And my Hebrew name was Shalom. It wasn't Shmuel. So I always found that very interesting.
Anyone have any comments on Jewish foods or our grandparents' customs?
Well, one thing that my grandmother used to make was tegla. And
The best.
Tell us what it is.
it's a pastry with honey on it.
Coconut.
And it's just delicious. And I can't get my wife to make it.
Anyone else? Art?
My mother used to make kishke. Anybody have kishke?
Tell us what kishke is.
Kishke is made from chicken, and it's a stuffing that you can, it's a stuffing, and you would stuff it in the chicken's neck after you killed the chicken. Took the neck off, then you would soak, and because it was just a small area, you would save the necks, and you put it in the refrigerator and keep it cool until you accumulated enough necks to sew together, and then you would stuff the necks, and then you would cook it. It was the most delicious thing ever.
Sam, did you have any favorite foods? No? Anyone else?
David.
I think what was surprising that we had a baker and you only had bagel one day a week. On Sunday morning, you'd have to go down to the bagel bakery on Riverside Avenue. And he made one bagel, a plain bagel, and that was it, just Sunday morning. And the nice part about it, he had these big ovens, and my mother used to make a cholent, and she made such a big cholent that it wouldn't fit in her oven. So you take it down on my sled to the bakery, and they put it in the oven, and you'd pick it up on Saturday. It would cook for 24 hours. You'd pick it up after services. You'd pay the baker $1 for adding water to it. So you could have had the toughest piece of meat in the world, and after being in that oven for 24 hours, it tasted like filet mignon. And so, my mother said in the old country they called it the poor man's dish, but for me, I loved Saturday having cholent because the meat was so tender, and the potatoes, and the kishke, and the beans. So,
Did anyone else?
and you had, and as far as food, we had 2 Jewish butchers. There was Big Fishman and Little Fishman. And my mother would never go to Big Fishman because he wasn't clean enough. And she liked Little Fishman because his store was immaculate. So, it was
David, weren't they across the street from each other?
around the corner.
Yeah, but
They were around the corner from each other.
What street were they on?
One was on Winooski
Winooski
Avenue
Avenue.
and Archibald Street.
Did anyone else deliver pots to the baker to keep them warm over Shabbos? Anyone else on the panel?
The what?
Merrill? You did? What'd
No,
you
my
bring?
mother did, not me. But she used to tell me somehow she had 4 brothers and sisters, but she was the one who had to pick it up. And I thought it was always interesting that she never made it for us.
Art, you got a comment on that too? Anyone else? I've heard that there were various Yiddish nicknames for business people. Does anyone have any recollection of what the Yiddish nicknames were?
Well, there was, roller skating was a big deal in the 30s and 40s. And the roller skating rink out in Mallin's Bay had a pie eating contest. And a guy named Louis Lapido won the contest. And forever after, he was called Fletcher. It was Fletcher Lapido. And Fletcher means big eater. We had one of my brother's friends lived with us because his folks moved away and left him here in Burlington. And his name was Chaimel. And I never, to this day, never knew him to be called anything but Chaimel. My grandmother, which used to spend a month with us in the summer, and she always called me David, never called me David, never in my life. So there were nicknames like that.
Anyone else have nicknames, stories, anecdotes? Okay. Any stories about keeping kosher, taking things to the butcher, or taking them from the butcher?
Yeah.
And which butchers, how many butchers did we have, where they were? Michael, go ahead.
My family lived in Winooski. This is before my father got married. And his brother Jack Levin, would have to take a chicken on the bus to Fishman. The chicken was alive, and to get it butchered for Shabbat. So every Friday, he'd have to get on the bus. And he told me, he says, that was the worst job. I hated it. But anyway, that's how we got the kosher chickens.
Where were the butchers located?
My mother was a terrible cook, but she was a great baker. She baked every cake like he mentioned. She made cheesecake. I can still taste it. It was wonderful. But she would, every Friday night, we would have to have boiled chicken. Well, somebody gave her a recipe for pineapple chicken. And so my kids hated it because every night we'd go to Grandma's house and we'd have pineapple chicken every Friday night.
Where were the kosher butchers located and what were their names?
Well, there was Fishman, so there was the Fishmans. And then we also had Rubenstein later on.
Well, one was on Winooski Avenue,
Yeah, what was his
across
name?
from the butcher shops. One was across from the Tomatora on Winooski Avenue, and one was around the corner on Archibald.
What was his name?
What?
What was his name?
Big Fishman and Little Fishman.
Morris and Joe Fishman.
No, but there was another guy. There was another guy.
Oh, Lapidow maybe.
Anyway, when I was a kid, we raised chickens in the backyard on Archibald Street. And my mother would have me take the little red cart, and she'd put the chicken in a crate, and I'd bring it up to the guy. I can't think of his name. And that was he was doing it for most of the people. Anyway, he would kill the chicken, and what he would do is cut the chicken's neck off, and then he would tie the chicken upside down on a limb of a tree in the back of his house. But before he did that, when they cut the neck off, the chicken would run all around the yard and with no head on until all the blood was almost gone. And then he would take the chicken and hang the chicken upside down on the limb of the tree until all the blood drained out. And then he'd give me the chicken back, and he'd put it in the crate for me, and then I'd take it back home to my mother.
Yeah, he wasn't a butcher, but Reverend Nadelson used to be the chauffeur. He used to kill the chickens.
He's the one.
Yeah.
Where was he located?
On Winooski Avenue,
Winooski Avenue.
right next to Lapido's.
I think he was on Ninto Avenue, wasn't he?
Well, later on, it was on Winooski Avenue near my cousins and so on.
2 doors away from the lawn.
Frank?
No, when we came,
Your mic up, please.
Hold it
Hold
closer.
it up.
we came a little later than these guys are talking about, as I said before, 1958, 60-some years ago. And our disappointments with the Jewish community were that the bagels that they mentioned before, to us, left a lot to be desired. And of course, there's no Jewish rye bread. And we still don't have a good Jewish rye bread in Burlington.
You have to go to Klinger's.
So, yeah, I got a Klinger's. It's passable.
Watch it, my daughter was.
Not this one.
My granddaughter.
Another comment while I do have the mic is that, one of the things that I still remember with great fondness when we came here in those first few years were the Jewish businesses, the people who worked for themselves. And D. Rosenthal, who ran the laundry, and Benny Greenblatt ran Burlington Paint, and of course the Maisel brothers ran the Maisel shoe store on North Street. And then they broke away from that. They had the great ideas, and they built what is now the Staples Shopping Center, and it was Gaines Department Store, which was a big department store, and it was really a wonderful thing. And of course, on Church Street, there were several stores. At Magram's department store, which was, I think, 3 floors or 4 floors high. And Hecky, Herzl Pazakow, I think David is here. He had a store on Church Street, and later became the Mayfair, which was wonderful. Cost me a lot of money. So, and many other stores.
And don't forget Nate's.
Yeah, that's right, Nate's, what a terrific guy. And we had Hill's hardware store. He had the North End, Izzy Kropsky. He had a small department store in the North End. And they were very entrepreneurial. These small stores very often had small stores in several other cities, in Upper New York State and in Vermont.
St. Johnsbury.
Yeah, St. Johnsbury, and there's a lot that I'm not mentioning here. I'll have to sit and think about it a little more.
Since we're talking about businesses, let's just take a walk back in the Old North End. So I'd like to do this by street, and I'd like you to just tell me the names of the businesses that you remember that were on the street. So what was on Bright Street that you remember growing up? Before or after
Cheese
your
factory.
apartments?
Yeah, the cheese factory.
Cheese factory.
Who had the cheese factories?
Rutstein.
Rutstein? Any other businesses there?
On Bright Street? I don't think so.
Were there
I think
bottlers
that was
there?
the
Do you
other
remember the
one.
bottlers?
What's that?
Yes.
Who was the
Cannon's Bottling was on
Use the
Bright
mic. Use the
Street.
mic, please.
And around the corner, Jack Rosenthal had a, next to the bus barn,
Vichy.
had soda.
Still Vichy.
Yeah, it was.
What about going down Archibald Street? What do you remember?
Well, you had the fish,
On which
you
street?
had
Archibald.
Archibald, you had Fishman Meat, you had Louis Rome, had a fish store, you had,
Nadelton had that
Ben
store.
Toll had a
Ben
grocery
Toll.
store,
My grandmother had a store there too.
yeah,
Greenblatt's Groceries.
across from each Oiler.
Yeah.
Oh,
What about North Winooski Avenue?
Well,
Empire Laundry.
Okay, what else?
Uh,
Was there another butcher there?
yeah, there
In the
was,
30s?
There was
Yeah,
a junkyard there,
Clinkerstein Junkyard was next door. Lapidas Pharmacy was up on the, near the triangle. And at the triangle were several different, it started from,
Mr. Kolodny,
the old man Kolodny.
Saul Amos had a deli.
So, yeah, then it was a delicatessen.
Did Flax have a butchery in there?
Pardon?
Flax? No, not that you remember?
Well, there was a, you said about Wright Street, David Pasikow, was it your grandmother or your aunt had a candy store there, and we'd have like a 3-minute break from Hebrew school, and we'd run across the street, and she had penny candy. And that was our salvation.
What was the name of that? You know the name of the store, David?
Sobel's, wasn't it?
Sobel's?
Mrs. Sobel.
What about North Street?
Oh, you had all the Jewish.
They were all,
So tell me what you remember.
North Street, at the very bottom.
We had Pinkelstein's Junk. Was there another one?
the outlet store by Jack Gold.
Okay.
Oh, on Archibald Street, you had another junkyard, Charlie Samuelson.
Yeah.
And going up and down North Street, were there
At the very
bakers?
bottom of North Street.
You
was
had
Alex
Basil's, you had
Clodney.
Bluebird.
One second, one at a time. Go ahead, Sam.
Alex Clodney grocery store. It was like a supermarket at that
Yeah.
time. And he was very successful. He had some relationship with the diocese or something. So he sold food to Catholic charities of every sort in all the Catholic institutions, probably schools in the area. And going up North Street, we had Bluebird Shoe Store on one side. Opposite it was Jeleno's Pastry Shop. And the son of the proprietor and the owners became a bishop, I think in Rhode Island.
The
And
greatest
Basil's-
jelly donuts I've ever eaten.
Yeah. And Basil's department store were there also. And Abe McCuskey had some kind of a variety store. And there were other little stores on North
What
Street
about
also.
Frank's Economy?
Oh, Frank's Economy was a predecessor to, was it going when your father had his store?
My father's store was a little after that.
Okay, it preceded your Greenblatt store.
Blumenthal was on Champlain Street.
Were there boys or girls clubs before or after bar mitzvah age as you grew up that were part of the synagogue? You
What's
were?
that?
Were you members of any boys or girls clubs?
Yeah, those
Jewish clubs, Jewish clubs.
we had Olive Sadik Olive, AZA, and for boys, and girls had B'nai B'rith.
Right.
And we had a pretty successful basketball team.
ACA.
The picture of the state championship Jewish basketball team is in the archives cabinet.
Well, in 1946, 47, and 48, AZA won the YMCA Church League for 3 years in a row. We had a terrific basketball team, and a lot of us played on the Burlington High varsity team.
Jeff, let's take one of these mics and let's, if anybody from the audience has any questions, let's take questions from the audience now. Just gonna take this short.
Fast.
I want to put in.
Questions? Anybody? Anybody?
Anyone, please.
Beth, coming to you.
I want to say something about Alec Kolodny.
Go ahead.
He, I went to Alec's funeral and sat in an area which pretty much was occupied by the people from North Street and the poorer sections of town. And these women were there and they were crying at Alex, and they started to tell stories about how Alec, during hard times, they could start charge accounts. And he would let them have charge accounts because they didn't have any money, probably during the Depression. And when the time came and they came in to pay their bills, most of them said he never took the money from them. So he really was an asset to our Jewish community.
Beth, did you have a question?
Yes.
Hold it up, hold up the mic so they can hear.
Share your mouth.
Can you hear me? No. Okay. For maybe David or Sam, because you guys knew my mom, and really David, but my grandfather, my David, I didn't know Benny Adler. His store, his grocery store, did you know the name of it? It was either on Riverside Avenue or Lakeside Avenue. It was a little grocery store. Anybody remember?
Remember the name of a grocery store?
By Benny, that was owned by Benny,
That was
Benny
owned
and
by,
Benny Adler.
that was owned by the Adlers. Any panelists remember a grocery store owned by the Adlers? Do you remember the name of it?
David, do you remember?
Her grandfather,
Use the mic.
your grandfather had a store in Lakeside.
What, do you
And
know the name
because
of it?
all of those French people that come in from Canada to work in the woolen mill, he told me that he had to speak French because every one of his clientele couldn't speak English. And that's when GE, before with GE, it was a cotton mill, and they brought all these people in from Canada, and it was like a company town. They had these apartments, and I think those people probably never got out of debt because they worked for the mill, and they had to pay rent to the mill that owned the apartments, and they were probably lucky that your grandfather had a store there, at least they could get food.
Do you remember the name of the store, David?
Before it was GE, it was Bel Air for us.
You know,
David, do you remember the name of the
I
store?
think it was, I don't know, was it Lakeside? Was it Lakeside something or
It was
other?
on Lakeside Avenue. My mother never told me, so I was just wondering if you knew.
Other people with questions? Anybody?
Wow. I think it's probably a good time to wrap it up. Everyone looks questioned out.
Thank you so much, panelists. We really appreciate you being here.